Hi guys, it's Satenda. We're going to do things a little bit differently today. So I've already drawn out this week's lesson, and instead of drawing it with you, I'm just going to talk you through it, and then um, you can pause the video at certain parts. Okay, so we're going to be starting to learn about Moses, who's a very cool person in the Bible from the Old Testament. So we're just going to start from Exodus 1, and it's going to be lots of lessons because it's a really long story, and I thought that instead of shortening Moses' whole story into one lesson, we could just really look at it in depth and do each week a bit more of the story. So can you split your page up into 6 boxes and let's get drawing. Okay, so in the first box we're going to start by looking at the start of Exodus chapter 1. So, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, moved to Egypt, and all of his sons moved with him. So that was Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and Joseph. We've learnt about Joseph before. He's the one with the multicolored coat. Joseph and all of his brothers and his father all moved to Egypt, and they all had loads and loads of kids, and their kids had kids, and their kids had kids. And so there were loads of Israelites in Egypt. And eventually, there were so many Israelites that there were more Israelites in Egypt than Egyptians. The Israelites outnumbered the Egyptians in their own country, and the Israelites were extremely powerful. So here I've just drawn lots of Israelites in Egypt. Okay, so pause it if you haven't finished this box yet. Okay, so box 2. Verses 8 to 11. So a new king came into power, and he was so annoyed by the fact that there were loads more Israelites than Egyptians in his country. And he said, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramesses as supply centers for the king. Okay, so we've got some Israelite slaves here. They are, if I can zoom in a bit, they've all got sad faces because they don't want to be slaves and they're being oppressed. They're being mistreated and abused because they're so powerful. God has given them so much power in a country that doesn't belong, that they are immigrants in. And obviously it is not okay to treat people badly because they are immigrants, but this was a very evil Egyptian king, so he was. Okay, so pause here if you haven't finished this box yet. Okay, on to the third box. So this is verses 12 to 14. So the more the Egyptians oppressed the Israelites, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. So I've drawn smiley-faced Israelites here because they're still slaves, but God is with them. And so even though they've got really horrible people who are making them do all sorts of horrible things, making them do manual labor and not paying them enough, and just genuinely being horrible to them, horrible slave owners, God was with them, and God helped them. God helped them through it, and he helped them to grow more and more, which was the Egyptians were only enslaved them in the first place because they were scared by how many they were, and making them into slaves was doing the opposite thing. Instead of making them become less in number, it was just making them grow more in number because God was helping them through. Okay, so on to box 4 on the second row now. Okay, so verse 15 says, Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. Okay, so Hebrew is the same as Israelite, yeah? So he gave this order to the Israelite midwives. When you help the Israelite women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. Okay? So because Pharaoh, the Egyptian king, wanted to get rid of the Israelites, he thought the best way to do it was to make sure there were no Israelite men. So if there are no Israelite baby boys, they can't grow up into Israelite men, and they can't have any more Israelite children. And so in that way, by getting rid of all of the boys, the Israelites will eventually die out. That was the plan. So I've drawn, let me see if I can, over here, this here is the symbol for men with the arrow, and this here is the symbol for women. So men with the X and women with the tick. If you haven't finished this box, pause now. Okay, next box. So this is verses 17 to 21, which says, But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. Why have you done this? He demanded. Why have you allowed the boys to live? Verse 19 says, The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, the midwives replied. They are more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time. So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Okay, so over here I've got quite a bit of writing. So like the most important bits that you should have is that the midwives feared God, so they disobeyed the king. And the Israelites continue to multiply. That's what's most important there, if you can't fit it all on the page. So, yeah, the Pharaoh was clearly not very happy because his orders were being ignored. And the midwives, they loved God, then they were like, well, killing babies is wrong. Killing people is wrong. We're not going to do that. So they didn't do that. And they came up with an excuse that they gave birth too quickly. There was nothing they could do. By the time they got there, the baby was already born, and they didn't want to kill it. They couldn't take it. It was already fine. So they just made excuses, essentially. If you haven't finished this box, pause now. Alrighty then, the final box. So, verse 22, the end of Exodus chapter 1. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Throw every newborn Israelite boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. So before, Pharaoh was only addressing the midwives. He said, right, if Hebrew midwives, Israelite midwives, if you are delivering an Israelite baby boy, kill it. And the Israelite midwives said, no, we're not doing that. And so then the Pharaoh said, right, okay, all Egyptians, if you see any newborn Israelite boys, throw them into the river, drown them, which is very, very crazy and very scary. That's what he said, because he was angry, and he was jealous, and he was scared, and he was full of hatred. So, yeah, and that is all of Exodus chapter 1. Next week we'll look into chapter 2, and we will look at a specific Israelite boy called Moses, who was born in the next chapter. But until then, have a lovely week, guys. I hope that you enjoy your bank holiday weekend. Hopefully the sun comes out for us at some point. And I'll talk to you next week. Bye!